like to talk to you today about a problem I think most of us share, which is how do we change our behaviors? How do we affect our habits? And I would like to introduce you to disinhabitation as a practice that can help us do that. The idea is that we shift our focus from our actions to the habitat, or rather the context in which actions take place. So let us begin with what I think is the more conventional view, of what appears to be the more conventional view. It states that in order to change your behavior, you should address your actions. Actions make for a clear and definite target. But that might not be true. First of all, actions are complex. The reason we act in a given way is not always so obvious. If you find you drink too much, it may be for reasons other than because you like to go out often. Secondly, our behavior often involves actions that are complex and interrelated and difficult to disaggregate. So if you're not productive at work, it's maybe because you don't wake up early enough. You don't wake up early enough because you go out too often, and you go out too often. I don't know why. There must be some reason. So thirdly, focusing on actions often makes things way too personal. So for example, in everyday language, you find that we say, oh, I didn't do this, therefore I'm lazy. You turn an action into a permanent defect. And that goes contrary to trying to change. So what I'm proposing is that we focus on actions. Instead of focusing on actions, we shift the focus towards habitat. A habitat is actually a much clearer target for what we want to try and address. How do we define a habitat? A habitat is a socially generated and sustained incentive matrix. That's a complex way of saying basically any context defined primarily in terms of its incentives and the expectations that result from those incentives. So look around you. Not in this particular case, but for me anyway, this is my workplace. And workplaces are a habitat. They can make you do weird things like stay in front of your computer for hours and wake up really early. So think of it this way. Constant incentives or stable incentives equal repeated actions. And repeated actions are habits. That's one way of putting it. So if we remove the constant incentives from the repeated actions, what you get is a habit without habitat. That doesn't make sense. So neither do actions without incentives. That's basically the idea. So now we're in a position to better understand what dishabitation means. Once we shift the perspective from actions to habitat, we can understand how we can affect our behavior with less resistance. So basically on the conceptual level, dishabitation is when we frame the problem of self-innovation or transforming yourself in terms of affecting what the context in which our actions are embedded and the incentives that feed those actions. Another way to think of it is that habits are like inhibitions. They're like inhibitions because they stop us from doing things that we want to do. Therefore, they're like inhibitions. So it's a little bit of a play on words when I say disinhibition. So in order to disinhabit yourself, you have to do 4 things. You have to focus on the behavior that you want to address, identify what it is in your environment that sustains that behavior, identify features in a different habitat that promote change and compel you to be different, and then move. So I'll conclude with an example of my personal experience. I found myself to be too shy, too taciturn, too solitary at one point, if you can believe it. And I found that the effort to change, the amount of effort that I tried to put into changing my behavior was not a good ratio. Basically, a lot of effort for no results. And I noticed that in spite of all my goodwill, I couldn't transform myself. So there had to be something more than me which makes me what I am. So I decided to experiment with what I've called disinhabiting, namely strategically identifying a different habitat in which I could act in order to transform myself. So I thought about where could I go where I would have to talk to more people, where people spoke the language that I speak, or at least I could speak to their language, where people are very social and communal, and where I was actually interested in finding out more about them. That place turned out to be, of all places in the world, Belize. And I moved there, and I was forced to interact because I didn't know anyone, and there was nobody there that would socialize with me unless I actually talked to them. And the results today, the results are that I'm here before you.